For the first 30 days after the Council's decree, humanity did exactly what it was told. Tribute shipments of iron, copper, titanium, and refined alloys departed from colony worlds on schedule. Cargo manifests were filed in perfect order. When the first Corvathi inspection team arrived at the orbital station above Earth's colony of New Anchorage, they found everything clean, organized, and cooperative. The human workers smiled politely, answered every question, and offered the inspectors coffee, which the Corvathi did not drink, but found oddly charming. The inspection commander filed his report with a single note at the bottom. Humans appear fully compliant. No signs of resistance. Back on Nathara Prime, Zorath read the report and felt a warm glow of satisfaction spread through his thorax. He had been right. Humans were soft creatures. Short-lived, emotional, fragile. They had no natural armor, no venom, no telepathy, no hive-mind coordination. They were just bags of water and calcium that somehow figured out how to build spaceships. Putting them in their place had been the right call. He did not bother reading War Commander Drexel's private memo, which arrived the same day, and said, in blunt Corvathi fashion, "Compliance this smooth is not obedience. It is preparation. I have studied human history. They do not break. They bend, and then they snap back with force. We should increase surveillance immediately." Zorath filed the memo without responding. He should have read it. While the galaxy watched humanity bow its head, 3 separate operations were unfolding in secret. The first was military. Fleet Admiral Laura Voss had spent her entire career preparing for a fight that she hoped would never come, but always knew might. Within hours of receiving Danny Holt's call, she activated a network of contingency orders that had been sleeping in classified files for nearly a decade. On paper, human warships were pulling back from contested zones as the Council demanded. In reality, they were scattering into positions that Laura had personally chosen years ago, deep inside nebulae where sensor readings were useless, behind the gravitational shadows of gas giants where ships could hide for months, and inside dense asteroid fields where only human pilots, with their strange talent for improvisation, could navigate safely. 160 warships vanished from the galaxy's awareness, like stones dropped into deep water. Aboard the destroyer Nightfall, a young weapons officer named Kevin Marsh watched the ship slide into the shadow of a massive brown dwarf star, and felt a chill run down his spine. He was 26 years old, fresh out of the academy, and he had joined the fleet expecting patrol duty and maybe the occasional pirate chase. Instead, he was hiding in the dark with weapons armed and orders sealed. He asked his captain, a woman named Brooke Callahan, what they were doing. Brooke was 38, compact and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for being absolutely unshakable in a crisis. She had a small scar on her left cheek from a hull breach she survived 5 years ago, and she wore it like a badge of honor. "We are the insurance policy," she told Kevin. "Diplomacy works best when the other side knows you can hurt them. Our job is to make sure they know." Kevin wanted to ask more questions. The look on Brooke's face told him this was not the time. The second operation was diplomatic, and it was Katie Wen's masterpiece. After leaving the council chamber, Katie did not return to Earth. She stayed on the Resolute and began a quiet tour of the galaxy, visiting every species that had been crushed under the Council's ranking system. She went to the Fenari homeworld first, a beautiful water planet called Delphis, covered in warm, shallow seas and floating cities made of living coral. The Fenari were amphibian people, gentle and soft-spoken, with large dark eyes and iridescent skin that shifted color with their moods. They had been classified as associate for 2 centuries, which meant they had a token vote on the council, but were still required to pay tribute to the Corvathi, who treated them as little more than a resource colony. Katie sat with the Fenari Elder Council in a room that smelled like salt and flowers. She did not ask them to fight. She did not ask them to rebel. She asked them one simple question. If things were to change, would you want them to? Every Fenari in the room turned a deep shade of blue, which Katie had learned meant hope. Yes, the eldest of them said, more than anything. Katie visited 11 more species over the next 6 weeks. The Drassic, clever insectoid traders whose colonies had been swallowed by the Sindari Collective. The Olani, massive but peaceful herbivores who had been forced to mine their own sacred mountains to meet tribute quotas. The Bravari, small and quick-minded engineers who built technology that Council species stole and rebranded as their own. Every single one of them said the same thing. Yes, if things could change, they wanted them to change. Katie did not make promises. She planted seeds. The third operation was the most dangerous, and it was run by a team that did not officially exist. Deep inside Earth's intelligence apparatus, a unit called Blackthorn had been quietly mapping the Council's internal communications network for years. They knew every relay station, every encrypted channel, every backdoor in the system. On Danny Holt's order, they began using that access, not to attack, but to reveal. They started small. A financial record here, an internal memo there. Documents that showed how tribute resources collected from lower-ranked species were distributed. Not to fund galactic infrastructure or security, as the Council publicly claimed, but directly into the private economies of the sovereign-class civilizations. Records showing that the Volundri Dominion had been skimming 30% off the top of all tribute collections for decades. Evidence that the Korvathi had deliberately sabotaged the Drassic's early attempts at independent trade to keep them dependent. The documents appeared on open networks across the galaxy, untraceable. News organizations on 100 worlds picked them up. Independent journalists who had long suspected Council corruption finally had proof. The effect was slow at first, like a crack forming in a dam. But with each new leak, the crack grew wider. On day 58, a massive data dump hit the galactic network all at once. Thousands of classified Council files, covering over 200 years of exploitation, manipulation, and outright theft. The data was so vast and so detailed that no one could dismiss it as fabrication. Every record was verifiable. Every number checked out. On Nathara Prime, Zorath watched the crisis unfold with growing fury. He ordered his intelligence services to trace the leaks. They could not. The source was a ghost, moving through their own systems like water through sand, leaving no tracks. For the first time, Zorath felt something he had not felt in 60 years of power. He felt afraid. But he would never admit that, not even to himself. Instead, he did what powerful beings always do when they feel their control slipping. He reached for a bigger hammer. He contacted War Commander Drexel and ordered the Korvathi to send a battle fleet to the nearest human colony. Not to attack, just to remind the humans who was in charge. Drexel, to his credit, argued against it. Sending warships to their doorstep when they are already angry is not a show of strength, he said. It is a provocation. Do it, Zorath said. That is an order. Drexel was a soldier. He followed orders. But as he dispatched 12 heavy warships toward the human colony of Haven, he had a feeling deep in his warrior's gut that something terrible was about to happen. Haven was a green world. It orbited a yellow sun, very much like Earth's own, and from space it looked like a jewel wrapped in white clouds and blue oceans. 2 million years ago, something had seeded the planet with life, and by the time human settlers arrived, it was covered in dense forests, rolling grasslands, and rivers so clean you could drink from them without treatment. It was the kind of planet that made people fall in love with it the moment they saw it from orbit. 400,000 people lived on Haven. Families, engineers, farmers, teachers, children. It was not a military outpost, it was a home. Greg Sutton was the colony administrator, and he took that responsibility personally. He was 47 years old, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and hands that still carried calluses from his years as a Marine, before he moved in the civil service. He had come to Haven 6 years ago, with his wife and 2 daughters, and he had spent every day since making sure the colony ran smoothly, that people were fed and safe and happy. When the alert came that 12 Korvathi warships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, Greg was in his office reviewing agricultural reports. He set down his coffee, read the alert twice, and then called his defense coordinator. "Are they hailing us?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Standard Korvathi intimidation package, demanding we confirm tribute schedules and submit to immediate inspection." Greg nodded. He had been briefed on contingency Blackwood 2 months ago. He knew exactly what to do. He opened a channel to the Korvathi fleet and greeted them with perfect courtesy. Yes, tribute shipments were on schedule. Yes, Haven would cooperate fully with any inspection. He apologized for any inconvenience and asked if the fleet commander would like to send a shuttle down for refreshments. He was so polite that it bordered on absurd. The Korvathi fleet commander was a captain named Vorak. He was experienced and competent, but he had spent his entire career bullying weaker species into compliance. He had never faced a real fight, and he had never needed to. His ships were bigger, his weapons were stronger, and every species he had ever confronted had backed down the moment he showed up. He expected the same from the humans. For 2 hours, Vorak's fleet held position above Haven, while inspection shuttles were prepared. But Vorak was impatient. The humans were being cooperative, but something about their tone annoyed him. They were too calm, too comfortable. A truly frightened species would stammer and rush to obey. These humans sounded like they were hosting dinner guests. Vorak decided to remind them of the power difference. He ordered his ships to activate their orbital bombardment targeting systems. He had no intention of actually firing. It was a standard Korvathi tactic. Point your guns at the planet. Let the people on the ground see the targeting locks appear on their sensors, and watch them panic. It worked every time. On the surface, Greg Sutton watched the targeting alerts flash across his screen. His defense coordinator looked at him with wide eyes. Greg picked up a secure communicator and said 2 words. Green light. 14 human warships erupted from the asteroid belt that ringed Haven's system. They had been there for weeks, powered down, drifting among the rocks like dead metal. Their hulls were coated in sensor-absorbing material that made them nearly invisible. Their crews had been living in cold, dark ships, eating ration packs, and sleeping in shifts, waiting for this exact moment. The heavy cruiser Carthage led the formation. Its commander, Captain Nate Aldrin, had run this scenario in simulation over 300 times. He knew the timing down to the second. He knew exactly where each Korvathi ship would be, because human intelligence had mapped Korvathi fleet formations so thoroughly that Nate could predict their positions better than the Korvathi could themselves. "All ships weapons free," Nate said. His voice was the same tone he used to order lunch in the mess hall. "Disable only. No kills." The ambush was surgical. Human electronic warfare systems hit the Korvathi fleet first, flooding their communications with noise and blinding their sensors with a wall of false signals. The Korvathi ships, which had been sitting fat and comfortable in a standard orbital formation, suddenly could not see, could not talk to each other, and could not coordinate. Not the explosive warheads that the Korvathi expected, but precision-guided electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to overload and shut down ship systems without destroying the hull or killing the crew. Each missile was targeted at a specific system on a specific ship. Engines here, weapons there, shield generators on that one. 90 seconds. That was all it took. 12 Korvathi heavy warships, each one capable of reducing a city to glass, went dark and silent. They drifted in space like toys dropped by a careless child. Lights flickered and died. Weapons powered down. Engines sputtered and stopped. Not a single Korvathi was killed. Not one. On the bridge of the Carthage, Kevin Marsh, who had been temporarily assigned to the cruiser as a tactical liaison, stared at his sensor display with his mouth open. He had seen the simulations, but seeing it happen in real life was something else entirely. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Nate Aldrin opened a communication channel to the Korvathi flagship. It took a moment for the signal to get through, because the Korvathi ship was running on backup power, and most of its systems were offline. When the channel connected, Nate could see Vorak on his screen. The Korvathi commander's scales had gone from dark green to pale gray, which Nate knew was a sign of shock in their species. Vorak's crew stumbled around behind him in the dim emergency lighting, trying to figure out what had happened to their ship. "Commander Vorak," Nate said. "My name is Captain Nate Aldrin, Earth Colonial Defense Force. I want you to listen carefully." Vorak stared at him. His jaw was hanging open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "You pointed weapons at a planet with 400,000 civilians on it," Nate continued. "Families, children. You did it to scare them. I want you to understand that we could have destroyed every ship in your fleet. Every single one. Your crews would be dead. Your ships would be debris, and no one in the galaxy could have stopped us." He paused to let that settle. "We chose not to. We disabled you because we want you alive. We want you to go home and tell your council exactly what happened here. Tell them that humans do not respond well to threats. Tell them that the next time someone points a gun at our people, we will not be this gentle." Nate cut the channel. The 14 human warships towed the disabled Korvathi vessels to the edge of the system, restored minimal power to their engines and life support, and released them. The Korvathi limped home in silence, their ships scarred and their pride shattered. Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy. Sensor recordings from Haven's orbital platforms showed the entire engagement. The Korvathi fleet sitting smugly in orbit, the sudden appearance of human warships from the asteroid belt, and the swift, precise dismantling of every alien vessel in under 2 minutes. Commentators on 100 worlds replayed the footage in slow motion, marking the moment each Korvathi ship went dark. The reaction was split down the middle. Among the lower-ranked species, there was something that had not been felt in a very long time. The Fenari watched the footage in their floating cities, and their skin turned blue with hope. The Drassic traders shared it across their networks with a single word in their language that roughly translated to "finally." The Olani, who had quietly endured decades of exploitation, gathered in their great stone halls and spoke in low voices about what this might mean. Among the sovereign species, the reaction was fury. Zorath called an emergency session of the Council and declared humanity in open violation of galactic law. He demanded a combined military response, a fleet so large that humanity would have no choice but to surrender or be destroyed. The vote was called. 9 members voted in favor of military action, but 3 abstained. 3 council species looked at the leaked documents, looked at the footage from Haven, looked at the growing unrest among the lower-ranked worlds, and decided they did not want to be standing next to Zorath when the building came down. It was not enough to stop the war fleet. 9 votes out of 12 was more than enough. But those 3 abstentions were a crack in the foundation, and cracks have a way of spreading. Zorath did not care. He had his votes. He had his fleet, and he was going to crush these humans once and for all. He gave the order to assemble the largest military force the galaxy had seen in over a century. The target was Earth itself. Hit the homeworld, break the spirit, end the rebellion before it could spread. It was a simple, brutal plan, the kind of plan that had worked for thousands of years. The combined fleet was a monster. 312 warships, drawn from 7 sovereign-class civilizations, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had ever built. The Korvathi contributed their dreadnoughts, massive gray vessels bristling with plasma cannons that could crack a moon in half. The Sindari sent their needle ships, long and silver, and controlled not by individual crews, but by the cold, calculating intelligence of the hive mind itself. The Volundri provided their crystal carriers, elegant and deadly, each one housing thousands of drone fighters that could swarm an enemy fleet like hornets. 4 other species filled out the rest: heavy cruisers, battleships, support vessels, and troop transports carrying enough soldiers to occupy a planet. It was the most powerful military force assembled in the galaxy in over 100 years. And it was all pointed at one small blue world on the edge of the Orion Arm. Zorath commanded the operation from the rear, aboard the Volundri flagship Throne of Stars. He had no intention of putting himself in danger. That was what soldiers were for. But he wanted to watch. He wanted to see the moment humanity's spirit broke. War Commander Drexel led the Korvathi contingent from the front, as Korvathi tradition demanded. He sat in his command chair aboard the dreadnought Iron Fang, studying the tactical displays with the focused attention of a predator tracking prey. Unlike Zorath, Drexel felt no joy in this mission. He was a warrior, and warriors respected strength. The humans had shown strength at Haven. Disabling 12 warships without a single casualty was not the act of a weak species. It was the act of a dangerous one that was showing restraint. Drexel had tried one more time to convince Zorath to negotiate. Zorath had told him to do his job and stop thinking so much. The combined fleet entered the Sol system from the outer edge, dropping out of hyperspace beyond the orbit of Neptune. 300 warships rippled into existence in the dark, cold reaches of human space and began their advance inward. They expected resistance at the border. There was none. They pushed past Neptune, past Uranus, past Saturn and its gleaming rings. Nothing. No minefields, no patrol ships, no defensive platforms. The human fleet, all 160 ships that intelligence had confirmed, was nowhere to be seen. On the bridge of the Iron Fang, Drexel felt his scales tighten against his body. In Korvathi biology, this was an involuntary fear response, and Drexel had not felt it in 20 years. "This is wrong," he said to his second-in-command. "They are not hiding because they are afraid. They are hiding because they want us to come closer." His second-in-command, a young officer eager to prove himself, suggested that perhaps the humans had simply fled. Drexel looked at him with an expression that made the young officer take a step backward. "Humans do not flee," Drexel said quietly. "Read their history. They charge into burning buildings to save strangers. They crash their own aircraft into enemy ships. They hold positions until they are dead, and then the next one steps forward. These are not creatures that run." The fleet continued inward. They passed the orbit of Jupiter. Ahead lay the asteroid belt, a vast field of tumbling rock and ice that separated the outer planets from the inner system where Earth waited. And then, every screen on every ship in the combined fleet turned on at once. Fleet Admiral Laura Voss appeared before them. She was sitting in a simple gray command chair, wearing the same plain uniform that every human officer wore. There were no decorations on her collar, no medals on her chest. Behind her, the bridge of her carrier, the longbow, was visible, clean, functional, and calm. Officers moved at their stations with the quiet efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Laura looked directly into the camera. Her gray eyes were steady, and her voice was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather with an old friend. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Fleet Admiral Laura Voss, Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. You have entered sovereign human space with hostile intent. And I would like to explain what is about to happen so that you can make an informed decision. On the throne of stars, Zorath hissed at his communications officer to cut the signal. The officer tried. He could not. Human electronic warfare systems had taken control of the fleet's communications network so smoothly that no one had even noticed until now. Laura continued. Over the past 60 days, my engineers have been busy. The asteroid belt you are about to enter contains approximately 4,000 autonomous weapons platforms. They are hidden among the rocks, powered down, invisible to your sensors. Each platform carries a battery of guided missiles, some kinetic, some electromagnetic, some carrying warheads that I would rather not describe in detail. They are networked together and controlled by a targeting system that has been tracking your fleet since you entered the system. She paused and let that number settle. 4,000. Behind the asteroid belt, my fleet is deployed in a layered defensive formation. You outnumber us roughly 2 to 1. Those are not good enough odds for you, and I will explain why. Laura leaned forward slightly. We designed our ships to fight enemies who are bigger and stronger than us. That is the only kind of enemy we have ever known. Every weapon we carry, every tactic we use, every piece of technology on our ships was built by people who assumed they would always be outgunned and outnumbered. You are walking into a system that has been prepared for exactly this scenario by people who have been thinking about it for a very long time. On the Iron Fang, Drexel watched the transmission with something that in another species might have been called admiration. But that is not the real reason you should turn around, Laura said. The real reason is this. She tapped a control on her chair, and the screen split. On one side was Laura. On the other was Ambassador Katie Nguyen, sitting in a bright, clean conference room, surrounded by representatives of 14 different species. Katie spoke now, and her voice carried the same calm authority that Laura's did. 6 hours ago, 14 spacefaring species formally signed the Terra Compact, a mutual defense and governance agreement that establishes a new framework for galactic cooperation based on equal representation and mutual respect. The signatories include the Fenari Republic, the Drassic Trade Union, the Olani Federation, the Bravari Commonwealth, and 10 others. She let the list sink in. 14 species, nearly 40% of the galaxy's population. Under the terms of the compact, Katie continued, an attack on any signatory is considered an attack on all. If you fire on Earth today, you will not just be at war with humanity. You will be at war with all of us. Laura returned to the screen alone. She folded her hands in her lap. So here is your choice. You can enter the asteroid belt and fight us. You will take casualties that your governments will not forgive, in a war that you cannot win quickly, against an alliance that will only grow stronger the longer the fight goes on. And, while your fleets are here, those 14 species will be closing their borders, seizing tribute shipments, and dismantling every structure of control that you have built over the past 1,000 years. Her voice hardened just slightly. Or you can turn around, and we can sit down together and build something better. The transmission ended. Silence fell across 300 warships. For 11 minutes, no one moved. The combined fleet hung in the void between Jupiter and the asteroid belt. And the weight of the decision pressed down on every commander, every officer, every crew member who had heard those words. The Bravali contingent broke first. Their commander, who had read the leaked documents and knew exactly how much his own government had been stealing from lower-ranked worlds, ordered his ships to withdraw. He transmitted a brief message to the rest of the fleet. We did not sign up for a war we cannot justify. 2 more sovereign-class contingents followed within minutes. Then the Sindari. The hive mind had calculated the odds with its billions of interconnected brains and concluded that the probability of achieving the mission objectives had dropped below acceptable thresholds. Their needle ships turned in perfect unison and accelerated out of the system. 140 ships vanished in the space of 20 minutes. Drexel sat alone on the bridge of the Iron Fang and watched the fleet crumble around him. His Korvathi ships remained. So did the Volundri. 80 warships total, facing a fortified system, a hidden fleet, 4,000 weapons platforms, and the political support of nearly half the galaxy. He opened a private channel to Zorath. "I told you," he said. His voice was flat and tired. "I told you from the beginning. They do not kneel." Zorath said nothing. Drexel closed the channel and gave the order. "All Korvathi ships, power down weapons and withdraw." The Volundri, alone and exposed, had no choice but to follow. The combined fleet dissolved like smoke in the wind. 300 warships had come to break humanity. None of them fired a single shot. And somewhere in the asteroid belt, aboard the carrier Longbow, Laura Voss watched them leave on her sensor display and let out a long, slow breath. She had not slept in 41 hours. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she pressed them flat against her knees so that no one on the bridge would see. "Stand down from battle stations," she said quietly. "All ships, stand down." The bridge crew erupted into cheers. Laura let them have their moment. Then she stood, walked to her quarters, closed the door, sat on the edge of her bunk, and allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what had almost happened. Then she straightened up, splashed water on her face, and went back to work. The weeks that followed the standoff at Sol were unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council of 12 had been the only system anyone knew. Species were ranked, tribute was collected, and those at the top lived well, while those at the bottom kept their mouths shut and their heads down. It was ugly and it was unfair, but it was stable, and stability has a way of making people accept terrible things. Now that stability was gone, and the galaxy had to figure out what came next. The first thing that happened was a wave of refusal. Within days of the fleet's retreat from Sol, species across the galaxy began rejecting the tribute system. The Fenari were first. Their government issued a simple statement that said they would no longer send resources to the Korvathi Empire, and that any ship sent to collect would be turned away. They had no military to back up this statement. The Terra Compact guaranteed their protection, and everyone knew it. The Drassic followed, then the Olani, then the Bravari. Within a month, the entire tribute system had collapsed. Ships that used to carry ore and minerals to sovereign worlds now sat empty in docking bays. And the flow of wealth that had sustained the galaxy's most powerful civilizations for centuries dried up overnight. It was not painless. The sovereign species had built their economies around that stolen wealth, and losing it caused real hardship. Factories on Korvathi worlds slowed production. Volundri construction projects stalled. Markets fluctuated wildly as traders tried to figure out what anything was worth in a galaxy where the old rules no longer applied. But the pain was temporary, and the change was permanent. 6 months after the standoff, representatives from every spacefaring species in the galaxy gathered on Nethara Prime, the same station where the Council had once sat in judgment over them all. The crystal chambers that had housed the Council were repurposed for a new body, the Assembly of Equals. The concept was simple. Every species got one vote. It did not matter if your civilization was 10,000 years old or 40. It did not matter if you had 1,000 warships or none. It did not matter if your economy was vast or modest. One species, one vote. Decisions required a majority, and any species could raise an issue for debate. There were arguments, of course. Some of the former sovereign species resisted the idea of sharing power with races they had spent centuries looking down on. The negotiations were long and sometimes heated. Delegates shouted at each other. Proposals were rejected and rewritten and rejected again. Twice, the whole process nearly fell apart. But it held. It held because the alternative was chaos, and because the leaked documents had made it impossible for anyone to pretend the old system had been fair. The Terra Compact nations nominated Katie Nguyen as the Assembly's first mediator, a neutral voice to guide debates and keep order. Katie accepted the role with the same quiet composure she had shown from the beginning. She did not give a grand speech. She simply sat down in the mediator's chair, looked out at the representatives of 63 spacefaring species, and said, "We have a lot of work to do. Let us begin." The former council species adjusted in different ways. The Sindari collective, ever pragmatic, adapted the fastest. The hive mind calculated that the new system actually benefited them in the long run. Equal trade agreements were more sustainable than forced tribute, and cooperation opened access to technologies and resources that had previously been hoarded. Within a year, the Sindari were among the Assembly's most active participants. The Korvathi Empire went through something more difficult. Their entire culture was built around strength and dominance. Being forced to accept equal standing with species they had bullied for generations was a blow to their pride that cut deep. Many Korvathi leaders wanted to reject the new order entirely and retreat into isolation. It was War Commander Drexel who prevented this. Drexel had been the one to order the retreat from Sol. It had cost him politically. Many in the Korvathi military saw it as a humiliation. But Drexel was old enough and wise enough to know the difference between shame and survival. He had studied human history more thoroughly than any other alien in the galaxy, and what he had found there had changed him. He had read about human warriors who lost battles but won wars through sheer persistence. He had read about human leaders who showed mercy to defeated enemies and turned them into allies. He had read about a strange human concept called honor and defeat that resonated with something deep in the Korvathi soul. Drexel went before the Korvathi High Command and told them the truth. "The humans did not defeat us with superior weapons," he said. "They defeated us with superior strategy and superior will. They knew what they were fighting for, and we did not. If we want to be strong again, we need to learn from them, not hide from them." It was a hard argument to make, but Drexel made it with the weight of a lifetime of service behind him, and the High Command listened. The Korvathi Empire joined the Assembly of Equals, and Drexel became their representative. He and Fleet Admiral Laura Voss met for the first time in person 3 months later, at a joint security conference on a station near the Galactic Rim. They were an unlikely pair, a towering reptilian warrior covered in battle scars, and a gray-haired human woman half his size. But they understood each other immediately. They had both spent their lives preparing for wars they hoped would never come, and they had both been proven right about the people they warned others not to underestimate. They began meeting twice a year to coordinate patrols along the rim, where piracy and uncharted threats were a constant problem. Their professional respect grew into something that both of them would have been too proud to call friendship, but that was exactly what it was. Zorath did not fare as well. When the Volundri people learned the full extent of what he had done, the stolen tribute, the political manipulation, the arrogant blunder that had nearly dragged their civilization into a war they could not win, they removed him from power. The process was swift and bloodless, carried out through a vote of the Volundri Assembly that passed with 92% support. Zorath was stripped of his title, his privileges, and his public standing. He disappeared into private life on a remote Volundri colony world, and within a year, most people had forgotten his name. He became a cautionary tale, a footnote in history books, an example of what happens when power convinces itself it is the same thing as wisdom. The people who had made humanity stand possible settled into their new roles with the same quiet determination that had carried them through the crisis. Captain Nate Aldrin was promoted to Rear Admiral, and given command of the first Joint Patrol Fleet, a mixed force of human, Corvathi, Fenari, and Bravari ships that patrolled the galactic rim together. It was messy at first. The species had different protocols, different communication styles, different ideas about what constituted a threat. But Nate was patient and fair, and he had a talent for finding common ground between people who thought they had nothing in common. Kevin Marsh, the young officer who had once asked his captain why they were preparing for a war, was now a lieutenant commander, serving as Nate's tactical advisor. He had grown up fast during the crisis, and the quiet, nervous weapons officer had become a sharp and confident young leader. Nate trusted him completely. Brooke Callahan took command of the Carthage and spent her time training officers from 6 different species in human combat doctrine. She described it, then asked, as creative problem-solving under pressure. Alien officers who trained under her came away with a grudging respect for the human approach to warfare, which could be summarized as, there is always a way, and if there is not, make one. Greg Sutton stayed on Haven. His colony became one of the most important diplomatic hubs in the galaxy, the place where the first blow against the old order had been struck without a single life lost. Ambassadors and dignitaries visited from across the galaxy, and Greg hosted them all with the same gruff hospitality he had always shown. He never sought fame or recognition. He just wanted his people safe, and they were. Danny Holt retired quietly, as he had always planned. He moved to a small house near a lake in Vermont and spent his days reading and fishing. He had never wanted to be a leader. He had wanted to be a public servant, and he had served. When reporters occasionally tracked him down and asked how it felt to have changed the course of galactic history, he would shrug and say, "I just made a phone call. Other people did the hard part." Laura Voss gave one final address before stepping down from active command. She stood before the Assembly of Equals on Nethera Prime, in the same chamber where Katie Nguyen had once been told that her species was subordinate. Laura looked out at the faces, human, Corvathi, Fenari, Sindari, Drassic, and dozens more, and spoke simply. "We did not fight for dominance," she said. "We fought because no species, human or otherwise, should be told that it is less than what it is. We are not your rulers. We are not your masters. We are your neighbors, and if you will have us, we would like to be your friends." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the Fenari delegation began to applaud, their webbed hands making a soft, rhythmic sound like rain on water. The Bravari joined in, then the Drassic, then the Olani. One by one, species after species added their voices, their hands, their claws, their tentacles to the sound, until the crystal walls of Nethera Prime rang with the noise of 63 civilizations, choosing, for the first time, to stand together as equals. On Earth, in a small apartment in Houston, Katie Nguyen's mother sat in her living room and watched the address on a screen. She had watched her daughter leave for the stars 7 years ago, a quiet young woman with a sharp mind and a stubborn heart. Now that same woman was helping to rebuild a galaxy. Katie's mother wiped her eyes, smiled, and whispered to the empty room, "That is my girl." Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere far above, beyond the atmosphere and the moon and the asteroid belt, where 4,000 weapons platforms were slowly being decommissioned, the galaxy was learning how to be better. It would take time. It would take patience and compromise, and more arguments than anyone could count. There would be setbacks and disappointments, and days when the whole project seemed impossible. But it had started. The chamber of the Galactic Council was enormous. It floated at the center of Nethera Prime, a space station made of pale crystal that caught the light of 3 nearby stars and scattered it into rainbows across every wall. 12 seats curved in a half-circle around a raised platform where speakers stood to address the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Each seat belonged to a different species, A different civilization that had clawed and fought and negotiated its way to the top of the galactic food chain over thousands of years. Katie Nguyen stood on that platform now, alone. She was not a tall woman. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, and wore the plain gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. She had no jewels, no ceremonial armor, no glowing energy fields wrapped around her body, like some of the alien ambassadors wore. She had a datapad in one hand, and 3 years of work behind her. 3 years she had spent on this station, arguing humanity's case. 3 years of meetings, presentations, formal dinners, and endless patience. She had learned to speak 4 alien languages. She had memorized the political histories of all 12 council species. She had smiled when they insulted her, nodded when they dismissed her, and never once lost her temper. Today was supposed to be the day it all paid off. High Arbiter Zorath sat in the tallest chair at the center of the council's arc. He was Velundri, an insectoid species that stood nearly 8 feet tall on 4 powerful legs. His upper body was covered in dark, chitinous armor that his species grew naturally, and his 6 eyes glittered like wet stones in the chamber's light. 2 long mandibles framed his mouth, clicking softly whenever he was thinking or amused. He was rarely thinking and almost always amused. Zorath had held his position for over 60 years. In that time, he had overseen the classification of 11 new spacefaring species. Not one of them had been ranked above associate. Most were placed in subordinate class, which meant they had no vote, no territorial rights, and were required to pay tribute in resources and labor to the higher-ranked civilizations. It was, in the simplest terms, a system designed to keep the powerful comfortable and the weak obedient. Katie had argued that humanity deserved associate status at minimum. Humans had achieved interstellar travel only 42 years ago, but in that time, they had established 17 colony worlds, developed unique technologies that even the council species found impressive, and maintained peaceful relations with every civilization they had encountered. Her case was strong. Every data point supported it. Zorath let her finish her presentation. He let the silence hang in the chamber for a long, deliberate moment. Then he spoke. "The Council has reviewed the petition of the human species," he said. His voice was deep and buzzing, like a machine vibrating inside a metal box. "After careful consideration, we have reached a unanimous decision." Katie held her breath. Humanity is hereby classified as a subordinate species under Section 9 of the Galactic Governance Charter. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she did not flinch. She had trained herself not to flinch. Zorath continued, and each new sentence was worse than the last. Earth and all its colony worlds would surrender 30% of their raw mineral output to the Council. Human vessels would withdraw from all contested border zones within 60 days. Annual inspection teams from the Korvathi Empire would be granted unrestricted access to every human installation, military or civilian. Failure to comply would result in economic sanctions, and if necessary, military enforcement. The other council members watched Katie with varying degrees of interest. War Commander Drexel of the Korvathi, a massive reptilian figure covered in scarred green scales, studied her with his yellow eyes. Unlike the others, he did not look amused. He looked cautious. The Sindari delegate, a pale and slender being who spoke for a hive mind of billions, showed no expression at all. The rest either smirked or simply did not care. Katie set her datapad down on the podium. She looked up at Zorath and met all 6 of his eyes without hesitation. "I would ask the council to reconsider," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "You do not understand what you have just done." Zorath's mandibles clicked rapidly. "The decision is final, Ambassador. You may return to your delegation." She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she picked up her datapad, turned, and walked out of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Not one of the 12 delegates said a word until she was gone. Katie walked through the corridors of Nathara Prime without stopping. Alien diplomats and station workers stepped aside as she passed. Some of them looked at her with pity. A few looked at her with something close to satisfaction. She ignored all of them. She reached the docking bay where the human embassy ship, the Resolute, was berthed. It was a modest vessel, nothing compared to the gleaming warships and luxury cruisers that the Council species flew. She boarded, sealed the airlock behind her, and walked to the communications room. She sat down, opened an encrypted channel to Earth, and typed a single message. They chose the hard way. The message traveled across relay stations and through hyperspace corridors, and arrived on Earth 14 minutes later. It appeared on the screen of Danny Holt, Secretary of Unified Command, in his office in Geneva. Danny was 53 years old, thin and quiet, the kind of man who people forgot was in the room until he spoke. He had gray at his temples and reading glasses perched on his nose, and he looked more like a librarian than the most powerful human being alive. He read the message twice. Then he closed his eyes and sat very still for a long time. When he opened them, he pulled up a file on his secure terminal. The file was labeled Contingency Blackwood. It had been created 9 years ago, shortly after humanity first made contact with the Council, by people who understood that the galaxy was not a kind place, and that smiles from powerful aliens usually meant something ugly was coming. Danny picked up his phone and called the Joint Admiralty. The first person to answer was Fleet Admiral Laura Voss. She was 61 years old, with iron-gray hair cut short, and a face that could have been carved from granite. She had commanded human fleets for over 30 years. She had fought pirates in the outer colonies, faced down rogue AI battle platforms, and once held a failing space station together, with nothing but engineering tape and willpower. The people who served under her loved her. The people who opposed her learned not to. They classified us as subordinate, Danny said. There was a pause on the line. Not surprise. Laura Voss was not a woman who was often surprised. It was the pause of someone shifting from one mode of thinking to another, like an engine changing gears. How long before the first tribute ships are expected, she asked. 90 days. Laura allowed herself a small, thin smile that Danny could hear in her voice, even over the phone. That is more than enough.